I think royal duty is extremely important. I think it's part of the fabric of what's the royal family and any future.
Something went wrong at Windsor Castle. One moment, the cameras were flashing. The next, Queen Camilla was in tears. All eyes turned to Prince William. No one expected what he did next. A brutal decision. A very public humiliation. And just like that, whispers of betrayal spread through the palace halls. Was it a personal vendetta? Or something far deeper? The monarchy's perfect image cracked that night. And what followed has shaken the royal family to its core. Because this wasn't just family drama. This was the future king taking a stand. Born not just into privilege, but into pressure. Prince William's life was never his own. From the moment he entered the world, the weight of destiny was already bearing down. Cameras captured his every smile, every stumble, every whispered word. But what they couldn't capture was the storm quietly brewing beneath the surface. Because behind the polished royal image was a boy caught between two worlds. The fractured love of his parents and the crushing weight of a crown that wasn't even his yet. Princess Diana's tragic death shattered more than just a nation's heart. It shattered his childhood. Her absence wasn't just emotional, it was foundational. Diana had been his anchor, his conscience, his silent armor. And losing her didn't just wound him, it shaped him. Every decision he made from then on carried her ghost in the room. Yet while William grieved in silence, the world kept watching. He had no choice but to grow up fast, sharpened by grief, forged by responsibility. And when the time came, he stepped into his role not with fanfare, but with quiet strength. While others around him courted chaos and headlines, William chose duty. He became the monarchy's steady hand. His vision? A modern crown rooted in ancient stone. 1 foot in tradition, 1 foot in tomorrow. He launched campaigns for mental health, breaking royal silence around trauma and vulnerability. He championed environmental causes, echoing his father's warnings, but reshaping them in a voice the new generation could trust. He traveled, shook hands, comforted survivors, and carried on the invisible weight of kings who'd come before him. But after the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, everything changed. Suddenly, the pressure wasn't distant, it was immediate. The future wasn't decades away, it was right now. The scrutiny grew harsher, the expectations multiplied, and the whispers turned to declarations. William was the face of the monarchy, now. But the throne didn't just come with crowns and ceremonies, it came with fractures he couldn't ignore. His relationship with King Charles was complicated, respectful, but never quite close. And now, the two men found themselves walking the same corridors, but with different visions. William reserved, strategic, unshakable. Charles, idealistic, conflicted, caught between worlds. Their bond was diplomatic, but not without its silent tensions. And then came Harry. Once brothers in arms, now estranged by wounds too deep for the cameras to capture. The exit of Harry and Meghan didn't just make headlines, it tore at the seams of the House of Windsor. Suddenly, William wasn't just heir to the crown. He was the monarchy's firewall, the one expected to hold it all together. But the damage was already done. The rift widened, the palace grew quieter, and William, once a prince among princes, found himself standing alone, facing a tidal wave of expectation. Yet amid this public chaos, one conflict became increasingly hard to ignore. It wasn't political, it wasn't global, it was personal. A silent power struggle, quietly tightening its grip. Because while William had learned to carry his mother's legacy, another figure had steadily risen beside the throne, one who represented everything his mother had once fought against. And the uneasy bond between William and Queen Camilla was about to reach its breaking point. Her story was never supposed to be told like this. Camilla, once whispered about behind closed palace doors, now walks the halls of power as queen consort. But the crown she wears didn't come easily. It was forged in controversy, shaped by heartbreak, and shadowed by one name the public never let go of: Diana. From the beginning, Camilla's presence was seen as a threat. To many, She wasn't just Charles's companion, she was the woman who stood between the fairy tale and its tragic ending. The public had chosen their princess. And Camilla, no matter how sincere or composed, was never meant to be part of that picture. The love story she shared with Charles wasn't a royal fantasy. It was complicated, quiet, and, for years, buried in scandal. By the time they married, the scars had already formed. Trust was thin. Eyes were skeptical. And every step she took forward was met with whispers from the past. Yet, despite the backlash, Camilla didn't crumble. She adapted. Slowly, deliberately, she began shaping a new identity. Not as the other woman, but as a figure of service. Her work championing literacy and domestic abuse awareness didn't grab tabloid headlines, but it spoke volumes to those watching closely. It was never about glamour, it was about quiet perseverance. Still, the acceptance she earned came in pieces. Her public appearances were met with polite applause, never thunderous praise. She was present, but peripheral. Visible, but never celebrated. Even within palace walls, the temperature never quite warmed, especially with William. Their relationship remained polite, but strained. Bound by protocol, not affection. And that tension, it never disappeared. It just got quieter. Behind the smiles and shared appearances, Camilla knew her place had been hard-won, not inherited. While Charles gave her legitimacy, the world gave her judgment. Her every move measured against a legacy she could never escape. Diana was gone, but never far. And William? He carried that legacy like a torch. He never said much. He didn't have to. His loyalty to his mother was unspoken, absolute. Camilla, for all her composure, was never blind to that wall. And as Charles's reign began, her role only grew. She stood beside him at state dinners, at coronations, at charity events, now with the full title, but still with the same cautious eyes watching her every step. But something had changed. With Charles as king, Camilla's visibility surged. More influence, more responsibility, and more resistance. Because with every inch she stepped forward, William felt the shadows grow longer. And beneath the royal protocols, the unresolved tension between them was starting to crack through. She may have been crowned queen, but she was still the outsider to Diana's eternal memory. And that unspoken rivalry, soft, subtle, but sharp, was about to be tested in a way no one saw coming. One royal event, one decision, and a power struggle that would no longer stay in the shadows. His name never appeared on the list. No royal introduction, no quiet nod of inclusion, just silence. And in that silence, a statement louder than any royal decree. Tom Parker Bowles, Queen Camilla's own son, was quietly, deliberately excluded from one of the monarchy's most high-profile charity events at Windsor Castle. To some, it looked like a simple oversight. But for those watching closely, this was a public reckoning, a strategic decision, a line drawn in full view of the world. Because this wasn't about one man missing one event. It was about hierarchy, about bloodlines, and about Prince William making it very clear. The throne is not a family reunion. Tom had always existed in a strange, undefined space. Technically family, but never royal. A food critic by profession and content to live outside the palace spotlight. Tom never asked for a crown, but Camilla, his mother, had spent decades climbing a mountain to legitimacy. And in her eyes, her son's presence at the Windsor event wasn't about status. It was about acknowledgement. Camilla reportedly made multiple requests to have Tom included on the guest list. Not as a political maneuver, but as a personal plea. A mother asking for a place at the table for her son. But the answer from William's office came swift and cold. Denied. For Prince William, it was more than protocol, it was principle. The royal family, to him, had to remain rooted in tradition. Tom was not royal by blood, not born into the line. And including him, even for one night, would blur the lines that William believed must remain sharp. Behind closed doors, the discussions turned tense. Camilla didn't argue in public, but the frustration, the humiliation, couldn't be hidden. When the night of the event arrived and Tom was turned away at the gates under strict instructions, It wasn't just a snub, it was a message, and Queen Camilla felt it like a wound. The tabloids seized the story in seconds. Photos from Windsor splashed across front pages. Rumors about a growing fracture between William and Camilla began swirling. Some framed William as a fierce guardian of royal order. Others painted him as cold, unyielding. And Camilla? They said she held her head high. But those closest to her saw the pain in her silence. Because this wasn't just protocol gone wrong. It was a reminder that no matter how far she'd come, no matter how high she'd climbed, her family would never truly belong. And yet, this wasn't an isolated decision. This public exclusion of Tom Parker Bowles would soon be revealed as just one piece of a much larger puzzle. A broader pattern that showed how Camilla's inner circle was being systematically edged out by William's rising influence, and the next name caught in the crossfire would cut even deeper. It came quietly, without headlines at first, but behind the silence was a decision that sent shockwaves through royal corridors. Prince William, now holding the reins of the Duchy of Cornwall, made a move that many didn't see coming. Annabel Elliot Queen, Camilla's sister and one of her most trusted allies, was let go. After nearly 2 decades of dedicated service, her contract as the lead interior designer for the duchy was not renewed. No farewell, no ceremony, just an official change in the books. And just like that, one of Camilla's few remaining footholds within the royal establishment was gone. But this wasn't just about paperwork or budgets, it was about power. And behind the veil of modernization and efficiency lay a deeper story, one that hinted at something far more personal. Annabel wasn't merely an employee. She had been a quiet presence behind some of the most elegant royal renovations in the duchy, updating cottages, refining royal residences, reshaping the look and feel of properties that brought in millions. Her work had earned praise from the firm and admiration from staff. But more than that, she was family. Camilla's rock, the one who had stood beside her through decades of scandal, silence, and slow redemption. Their bond wasn't political, it was personal. Annabel was there when Camilla married Charles. She was by her side at public events. And when Camilla became queen, Annabel didn't bask in the spotlight. She stayed behind the scenes, quietly doing the work that few saw, but many benefited from. Until William made the call. The announcement was framed as a routine reshuffling. Reports claimed the duchy team had learned enough from Annabel's years of guidance, that her departure was part of a broader effort to streamline operations. But insiders weren't convinced. The timing raised eyebrows. The decision came mere months after William inherited control following King Charles's ascension. And in a pattern that was becoming harder to ignore, it marked the second high-profile exclusion from Camilla's side, first her son Tom, now her sister. To those watching closely, this wasn't just modernization. It looked like a message, a quiet removal of influence, a trimming of branches that no longer fit William's vision of the monarchy. For Camilla, the blow landed harder than she let on. Publicly, she remained composed. But behind palace doors, it cut deep. Annabel's dismissal wasn't just the loss of a role, it was the loss of one of her last connections to normalcy within an institution that had never fully embraced her. She had worked tirelessly to protect her family, to bring them into the royal fold without disruption. And now, one by one, they were being cast out. Quietly, methodically. Camilla understood the politics of the palace better than anyone. She knew when a door had been closed, and this one had been bolted shut. But if there were any doubts that a line had been drawn, they vanished at the next royal gathering. Because what had begun as private tension was about to be exposed for the world to see at one of the most watched ceremonies in royal history. The coronation of King Charles III was supposed to be a moment of majesty, centuries of tradition unfolding before the world's eyes. Westminster Abbey was filled with grandeur, with every detail designed to convey strength, unity, and continuity. And yet, as the newly crowned monarch walked the aisle in solemn procession, a single moment revealed the fracture beneath the surface. Queen Camilla, adorned in the full glory of her new title, followed just steps behind her husband. But as she passed the rows of dignitaries, royals, and nobles, no one bowed. Not a single head lowered in respect. The silence wasn't loud, but it was piercing. For a monarchy obsessed with ritual, that absence of acknowledgement wasn't a mistake. It was a message. To the public, it may have seemed subtle, a brief break in protocol, but to those inside the royal machine, it was unmistakable. This wasn't an oversight. It was a quiet protest, a moment where tradition met hesitation, and the veil of unity slipped. Those seated along the aisle were no strangers to the expectations of royal decorum. They knew when to curtsy, when to applaud, when to fall silent. So when Camilla walked by and the room remained still, it wasn't confusion, it was commentary. And the meaning behind that silence echoed louder than any spoken objection. The woman once called the most hated in Britain had reached the pinnacle of royal power, but not of royal acceptance. It didn't take long for the media to pounce. Tabloids dissected the moment with forensic precision, drawing lines between Camilla's past and the present symbolism. Opinion columns asked the questions no one inside the palace dared to voice. Was this the monarchy's subtle way of drawing boundaries? Had Camilla's rise finally hit an invisible ceiling? And what did this say about her standing not with the public, but with the very institution she now represented? Social media erupted with debate. Some praised the moment as a quiet reckoning, others called it disrespectful. But few denied its impact. In a ceremony meant to project strength, that brief stillness stole the spotlight. For Camilla, the optics were brutal. She had fought her way to legitimacy through decades of restraint, silence, and loyalty. And yet, in that defining moment of public validation, she was met not with reverence, but with resistance. Her face, composed as always, revealed nothing. But those closest to the throne knew what it meant. Behind the fanfare, the power plays were real. This was no longer about public image, it was about internal loyalty. And Camilla had just been reminded, in the most public way possible, that crowns don't erase memory. But this moment wasn't isolated. It was a thread in a tapestry, unraveling in plain sight. The narrative of quiet exclusion, of strained alliances, was starting to take shape. And as the coronation dust settled, both the public and the press began asking the same question. If this was how Queen Camilla was treated on her husband's coronation day, what else was happening behind palace walls? The monarchy has always been a spectacle, but this time, it wasn't the pageantry that made headlines. It was the silence, the snubs, the exclusions, and the tears behind the palace walls. After Tom Parker Bowles's public rejection and Queen Camilla's unsettling coronation moment, the media descended with precision. Headlines screamed betrayal. Analysts speculated about feuds. Columnists crafted narratives of shifting power and silent protest. And for once, it wasn't Harry and Meghan dominating the royal scandal cycle. It was William. And Camilla. What had once been the quieter corner of royal dynamics had now become the epicenter of controversy. Every news outlet, from tabloids to trusted networks, wanted to know the same thing. Was this a palace purge? The Windsor event became the flashpoint. Camilla's son turned away. Her sister dismissed. Her entrance to the coronation unacknowledged. These weren't isolated incidents, they were seen as calculated moves. Prince William's firm grip on protocol was praised by some as necessary for preserving the monarchy's integrity. But others weren't so sure. Critics questioned whether this new generation of leadership was strengthening the monarchy or hollowing it out from within. And as the stories gained traction, the public began to pick sides. For every voice defending William's uneasy traditionalist stance, another cried out against what they saw as cold rigidity. Why should Camilla's family be treated like outsiders? Some asked. The monarchy must evolve, said others. The divide wasn't just inside the palace, it was in living rooms, on talk shows, across dinner tables. And then came the avalanche of social media. TikTok clips dissected every second of the coronation walk. Twitter exploded with theories. Instagram reels compared body language between Camilla and William. Hashtags like "Darid coronation snub" and "Darid not my queen" trended worldwide. Social media didn't just echo the headlines, it amplified them, twisted them, and sometimes rewrote them altogether. But underneath the memes and mockery lay something more serious. A growing sense that the monarchy was once again losing control of the narrative. Polls began surfacing. Some showed a drop in Camilla's favorability, an echo of the ghosts she thought she'd outrun. Others revealed that while William remained one of the most trusted royals, many questioned his compassion and flexibility. The balance was delicate, too harsh, and he risked being seen as heartless. Too lenient, and tradition would seem compromised. The palace tried to remain silent. No official statements, no corrections, just stiff smiles at events and carefully controlled appearances. But the silence only fueled speculation. Because when the monarchy doesn't speak, the world fills in the blanks. Beneath all the noise, the core issue loomed. Relevance. The royal family had weathered scandal before, but this felt different. This was about identity, about the clash between past and future. And as cracks widened, the question wasn't just about who would wear the crown. It was about what the crown would mean in a world that was watching more closely than ever. The institution needed a steady hand, a unifying presence, and that responsibility, whether he welcomed it or not, now fell squarely on the shoulders of King Charles III. Because, as the headlines roared and opinions swirled, one truth became impossible to ignore. The monarchy's next move had to be more than ceremonial. It had to be decisive. For King Charles III, the crown had never felt heavier. In a palace steeped in tradition and surrounded by centuries of expectation, he now faced the very crisis he had spent decades trying to avoid. A quiet war had erupted within his own household, one that pitted his eldest son against the woman he had spent a lifetime fighting to legitimize. Prince William, resolute in his defense of royal tradition, had drawn a line in the sand. Queen Camilla, wounded by a series of exclusions that targeted not only her, but those closest to her, was left publicly humiliated. And Charles? He was caught in the middle, forced to wear the robes of both monarch and mediator, king and father, husband and judge. The first signs of discontent had unsettled him, but not surprised him. Charles had always known that integrating Camilla into the heart of the monarchy would come at a cost. What he hadn't anticipated was that the most significant resistance would come not from the public, but from William. As reports of Camilla's son being denied entry to a royal event, and her sister quietly removed from the duchy payroll, reached the king's desk, Charles was deeply troubled. Not because he didn't understand William's rationale, he did, but because the consequences of these choices had already begun to fray the fragile unity he had worked so hard to build. In private, Charles acted swiftly. He called for discreet meetings, seeking to soothe the storm without drawing attention to the cracks forming beneath the surface. He reminded William of the weight of perception that the monarchy survived not just through strength, but through the appearance of solidarity. He comforted Camilla, assuring her that her place in the royal family was not conditional, not temporary, and certainly not dependent on the approval of others. But reassurance could only go so far. William was unmoved. His loyalty to the memory of his mother remained steadfast, and in Camilla's growing influence, he saw a threat to the very structure he was preparing to one day inherit. For Camilla, every new slight reinforced a painful truth. Acceptance in the public eye had not secured her standing in the private halls of the monarchy. Charles had lived through royal scandals before. He had seen how bitterness could fester behind palace walls, how silence could be weaponized, and how even a single unresolved rift could erupt into national disgrace. But this was different. This was his own family. And unlike the public dramas of years past, this conflict refused to explode. It lingered, slow-burning and corrosive. He turned to precedent for guidance. The rifts between George VI and Edward VIII. The quiet disapproval Queen Elizabeth II once held toward Princess Margaret's choices. History was filled with royal fractures, and very few had healed without leaving scars. Still, Charles remained committed to resolution. He leaned on his decades of diplomatic experience, choosing words carefully, offering gestures of reconciliation in quiet, behind closed doors. But even the king's influence has limits. William respected his father, but he was no longer the boy who followed orders. He was the heir apparent, determined, independent, and increasingly vocal about the monarchy he intended to shape. Camilla, for her part, showed restraint, but the pain was visible to those closest to her. No statement could erase the sting of being passed over No meeting could undo the humiliation already broadcast to the world. And so, Charles found himself presiding not over peace, but over an uneasy truce. A calm on the surface, with unrest churning below. His efforts had stalled the damage, but not reversed it. And for all his wisdom and experience, the king was beginning to realize a painful truth. This was not just a conflict of personalities. It was a fundamental clash over the future of the monarchy itself. A future that, despite his best intentions, was slipping further from his grasp. What began as a private family rift has now ignited a much larger question, one that strikes at the very foundation of the British monarchy. Is it still enough to preserve the customs of the past? Or must the royal institution evolve or risk becoming irrelevant in a modern world that no longer accepts tradition at face value? At the center of this storm is Prince William. Steeled by his upbringing and deeply aware of his future role, William envisions a monarchy stripped of excess, one that leans into duty, heritage, and hierarchy. For him, every decision, no matter how controversial, serves the greater goal of safeguarding the institution's stability. His exclusions, his firmer stance on protocol, his quiet refusal to bend to sentiment, they all point to one thing: a determination to guard the monarchy's core from dilution, even at personal cost. But not everyone inside the palace shares his view. Queen Camilla, shaped by decades of rejection, has long believed that the monarchy cannot endure on tradition alone. To her, modernization isn't a threat, it's a necessity. Her quiet inclusion of her children and family, her efforts to present a softer, more relatable side of the crown, speak to a different vision. One that makes room for blended families, public engagement, and a modern redefinition of what royal means. The divide between William and Camilla isn't just personal, it's generational. One looks backward to uphold, the other forward to adapt. And caught in between is a monarchy that can no longer afford to ignore either side. The public, too, is no longer content to watch silently. Younger generations demand transparency, diversity, and relevance. Older ones cling to the rituals and rhythms of a royal legacy they've grown up with. Across social media, newsrooms, and community forums, opinions split sharply. Some applaud William's resolve, saying the monarchy must remain untouchable to retain its mystique. Others see Camilla's efforts as humanizing, essential for survival. In an era where authority must be earned, not inherited, the conversation is no longer limited to insiders. The monarchy's future is being debated in real time by citizens who, for the first time, feel they have a stake in how the crown evolves. Behind palace gates, whispers of reform are growing louder. Discussions about streamlining roles, cutting non-working royals from payrolls, reimagining coronation traditions, and redefining titles aren't mere speculation anymore. The battle isn't just over who gets a seat at royal events. It's about what that seat represents in the 21st century. Can the monarchy remain a symbol of continuity while embracing a more inclusive, transparent identity? Or will clinging too tightly to tradition isolate it from the world it claims to serve? The answer isn't clear. What is clear, however, is that the monarchy now stands on a fragile edge. Every decision made in these corridors of power, whether to include, to exclude, to modernize, or to preserve, carries with it the weight of centuries and the eyes of millions. The crown may endure, but the shape it takes in the years ahead will be defined by these very moments. And as the dust begins to settle, one truth remains: this is no longer just a family in conflict. This is history in motion. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one!